What hasn't changed though, unfortunately, is the fact that there's too many buyers and too few vehicles. Their next protocol of purchases might look more like online with zero negotiations, and they'll charge whatever they want. Remember what Ford was dealing with? They had hundreds and thousands of vehicles sitting on the lots, missing a chip or two to get them out to market. Life's too short to drive boring cars. Over the last 2.5 years, car prices have been rising to unprecedented levels. Inflation's been climbing, and people have been paying an inordinate amount of money for even used cars because they can't get a brand new car. So unfortunately, there's been a very complex series of events that have created this phenomenon. But the final question is, have we finally turned the page? And now we can finally talk about when car prices are going to sink like a rock. Let's get into it now. In 2019, before this car price crisis actually started, you could walk into a dealership, you could pick the vehicle of choice, you could sit down with a salesperson, negotiate the best price for your used vehicle. If you wanted a new one, often it wasn't much more than putting a deposit, negotiating the rates, and then finally getting the car in about a month or so. But lots has changed since then, and there's a whole reason for that. Unfortunately, what happened in 2020, all of a sudden, many factories closed down because there was a shortage of inventory and people were getting out there. People were sitting at home, but they wanted to spend their hard-earned dollars. They had nowhere else to spend it. They weren't traveling, so they were looking at buying a new car. But unfortunately, it was compounded. It actually flipped the tides because there was less inventory. Then there was a perfect storm with chip shortages, made it more and more difficult for those manufacturers that were actually producing vehicles to get them actually to market. And over the last 2 years, there's been a few ups and downs in terms of the marketplace. What hasn't changed, though, unfortunately, is the fact that there's too many buyers and too few vehicles, and that continually drives prices up. Now, it doesn't take long just to look in social media, and you can find dozens of people that are speculating what's going to happen and when the bubble will burst on the car pricing market. But during these last couple of years, because you couldn't buy a brand new vehicle, there's many stories of people buying a 4-year-old Toyota Tacoma and paying full retail price for a vehicle that had 120,000 kilometers on it. Absolutely unheard of. There's also hundreds of stories of people trying to walk into the dealership and negotiating a deal. Not going to happen. That time has come and gone. That was a 2019 phenomenon. Now as we get into 2022, you can no longer negotiate a deal. It's pretty much sign on the dotted line and pay what the dealer's asking you. There are even rare stories where some used vehicles with significant miles are worth even more than their brand new counterparts, just because people are finding themselves lacking the want to actually wait around for that new vehicle, which in some cases may be upwards in 1 to 2 to even 3 years to get your new car. So clearly there's been a little bit of a shift in the industry, of course. Now, as you'll notice, I'm on a car lot and there's a lot of vehicles available for sale. Here's the used car side. But since then, some things have changed in the industry. Look right here, we're walking down, we see a whole series of different Land Rover, Range Rover vehicles. There's a whole lineup here, as you can see, brand new vehicles with plastic on the seats, many of them ready for the new car owners to buy. So then you ask yourself, if everybody's talking about a shortage of vehicles, then why am I looking at this many vehicles on the lot? How about all these used vehicles too? There are some different styles, but if you look here, you'll see blacks, whites, and more whites, and more blacks, and more whites, and blacks, and whites. Oh, there's a silver. So what we're talking about is the actual theme. What there is now a slightly increased availability, but unfortunately people are having to possibly settle for a configuration, maybe a style that they weren't interested in. Maybe they want a red one, but they can't get one, so now you have to settle for a white one, and it might even be missing some of the options that you were hoping to get. So now as the chip shortage continues on, consumers generally have less options to pick from. As well, there's other situations. Like right here, we're looking at a BMW. And what BMW has now elected to do is actually removing some of the critical options. And now what's happening is they're starting to ration the chips. So BMW is now saying, hey, if you go without the iDrive system, we'll knock off $2,000 off the top end of the price tag. And a lot of other car manufacturers are starting to consider the same. Maybe doing without power seats, or maybe those specialty modules. But the car manufacturers are now trying some other sly techniques. For example, what we're looking at here is a Ford. Now, what Ford is saying, once they start to pump out the pure EV vehicles, their new business model looks more like having zero inventory, thus obsoleting the actual dealer where you put boots to the ground. And where once you were able to walk into the dealership and buy this brand new vehicle, their next protocol of purchases might look more like online with zero negotiations, and they'll charge whatever they want. It's a huge money savings, ups the profits, and ultimately takes out the middleman. But there's some other things that are starting to change. For example, we walked into a Toyota dealership the other day and we decided, hey, we were going to buy a Toyota Camry, similar to what we're looking at right here. But lo and behold, they had no vehicles in the showroom to actually test drive. And on top of that, what we're looking at here is an internal combustion engine. Right here, this one's not the hybrid version. When we spoke with the Toyota salespeople, we found that quickly I could get myself a brand new Toyota Camry in about 4 or 5 months. But if I wanted the hybrid version of the same model, I'd have to be looking at 1.5 to 2 years before I even got that vehicle. So clearly there's still a shortage. So then what about Tesla? Everybody's talking that pure EV is the future. Do you think you're going to get some deals there? After all, there's more push and influence, and as internal combustion engines start moving out, you think you can get a great deal on these types of vehicles? The short answer is no, you're not. And there's 2 reasons for that. Number one, these vehicles are highly technical. Lots of chips and technology behind the skin of these vehicles in terms of a Tesla. That's right, you don't have an engine there anymore. There's no internal combustion engine planted under that hood. You have electrics to power these fancy headlights. You have electrics to fold away these mirrors. You have electrics to pop out these door handles. You have electrics to lift up the rear trunk. And you have electrics driving this vehicle on top of it all. So in other words, as the chip shortage continue to roll on, you're finding yourselves more and more difficult to get these vehicles. You're having to wait longer. And what do you think that means? Prices keep going up. And on top of that, what drives the electric motors in this? It's batteries. And what is the key element in batteries? It's called nickel. And unfortunately, nickel is a key element that has a stranglehold in Europe with the obvious crisis that's going on right now. Now, while there's other markets, for example, Canada and some parts of US and even Europe, trying to come up for alternative sources of nickel to build these batteries, the fact of the matter is that doesn't happen overnight. Again, you're dealing with the fact that many vehicles are starting to build up inventory, and that actually does help curb pricing to some degree. So you're starting to see electric vehicles everywhere. For example, here's a beautiful new Jaguar I-Pace. That's their example of pure electric vehicle. Also, almost every day I'm on the street, I'm passing a Tesla, or for example, like yesterday I passed an i3 BMW. They're everywhere. The inventory is building for EVs, and it's catching a stranglehold, thus leaving less of the internal combustion engine available for the buyers. So because we're still dealing with a relative chip shortage and rationing for manufacturers to get the vehicles just on the market, remember what Ford was dealing with? They had hundreds and thousands of vehicles sitting on the lots, missing a chip or two to get them out to market. But the reality is, as long as this chip shortage continues, there's going to be an escalated price adjustment that we have to expect. Now, 2020, 21, we start to see the climb. We saw anywhere, depending on the vehicle, anywhere from 20, 30, up to almost 50% increase in the base price of a vehicle, particularly on the used car market, just because of a lack of inventory. But is that going to end here in 2022? So I've had people actually ask me, when is the right time to buy? Do we want to buy 2022? If you're trying to maximize your savings, is this in fact the time to buy? No, most people would say this is probably the peak. And a lot of people, if you look at all these critics all over the internet, are saying, oh, the bubble is about to burst. We're bursting the bubble. It's actually almost done, and we're on the downhill slide. Well, the reality is that's really not going to happen anytime soon. So if you're thinking, hey, I'm going to wait for 2023, maybe the spring, that's itself not going to be the criteria to gain some significant savings. That's not going to happen. Because now, unfortunately, with what's been going on the last couple of years, lease returns that normally hit the market are in lower numbers because the vehicles weren't available on the new car market. So now the used car market continues to suffer for at least 2, 3, or 4 more years beyond this worldwide crisis that we're talking about right now. It's going to stagger and it's going to drop over to the next few years. So the reality is inventory is going to continue to be compromised. There will be some inventory available, may not be to your liking, but even though some of the car lots are starting to fill up like we're starting to see here, does not necessarily mean you're getting the vehicle of your dreams. And it's also not an indicator typically that you're going to get a great deal if you walk into the dealership to try to negotiate on a new one. And because the chip shortage continues to go circle round and round and round, and the dealers have now learned that they no longer need to provide incentives, they don't need to sign up and give you all the extra freebies and throw-ins, that doesn't need to happen anymore, and therefore, prices remain high. And now the perfect storm is absolutely evolving. Now we're getting into the world of pure EVs and plug-in hybrids. And what do you think that means? That means the continued demand on that nickel that's required for the batteries. That also means a continued strong demand for chips, which are in fact still in a shortage. And sadly, the internal combustion engine is slowly being phased out. And so the higher cost of production on some of this new technology and these new electric vehicles is going to continue driving the prices up higher and higher. So long and short of it, if you need a new vehicle, there's no real end in sight, and no, the prices are not going to drop like a rock anytime soon. There may be spotty opportunities to get a deal. However, in general, prices continue to rise. And lastly, be sure to check that video. It's going to help you 10 things not to tell a used car salesman if you're buying a new car. Hope to see you real soon. Catch you then. Bye-bye.